Thank you all for coming. As you've heard throughout the morning and the afternoon, it takes a collaborative effort of people, of information, of different segments of stakeholders coming together. And it takes people in all nations, groups in all nations. And that's what the Atypical aHUS Alliance is all about. As you can see on your screen, there are organizations around the world that are working to raise awareness for this very rare disease, atypical aHUS, and they do a fine job. They are the best suited to give you information about what is going on in their own country for patients and with research, because atypical aHUS is a very rare disease. Compounding that, a very rare disease population, that makes research more difficult, but it also makes sharing information more difficult. With atypical aHUS, there are multiple spellings of the word, but sometimes we find our research in nephrology journals, hematology journals, rheumatology journals, immunology. We find it across the spectrum because wherever blood flows, that's where atypical aHUS activity, thrombotic microangiopathy, can affect all body organs and all body systems. So if you think of it as disease states and conditions being trees in a forest, and if you pick out that one tree, that would represent the rare diseases. Even then, there are different definitions of what a rare disease is. In America, it differs from the rare disease definition in the EU. And if you look at that tree on rare diseases, one single leaf on that one single tree in the forest is atypical aHUS. Is it any wonder it's so difficult to diagnose? Out of a population of 1 million people, there is an estimated 1 to 2 people who have atypical aHUS. Again, in the literature, that number varies. Some people say 1.4, some people say 2. But if you look at a population of approximately 350 people in the United States, mathematically that would work out to 350 patients. Or perhaps if you double the number, that would make it, again, a very small population of people. If you look at the world population of 7.5 million people, that would be 7,500 million people. That would mean approximately, at the low end, 7,500 people in the world who have atypical aHUS. Given that it presents so differently in so many different patients, it's easy to understand why it's difficult to diagnose. On top of that, as mentioned earlier, atypical aHUS does not affect only the kidneys. As a matter of fact, according to one research study, De Yao and company in 2015, 1 in 5 atypical aHUS patients have preserved kidney function. So if you're looking for kidney labs as a marker of disease activity, that's not necessarily always an accurate situation, because other organs and systems can be affected, whether it's the brain and nervous system causing seizures, heart or cardiovascular implications, which would, again, an atypical aHUS patient may first see a cardiologist. So it points to the thrombotic microangiopathy team approach, a multidisciplinary approach. There are atypical aHUS patients who have vision issues, with different kinds of eye involvement, whether it's pancreatitis or whether it's some other type of GI issue. Again, multiple organ systems can be affected, which again makes diagnosis very difficult, and it points to the need toward specialists working together in a comprehensive and holistic care team. Atypical aHUS doesn't just affect the patient, it affects all areas of patient life, whether it's the caregivers, employers in the workplace who have to make accommodations for employees who need to leave to have treatment. It affects the patient lifestyle with quality of life issues. But there's also the economic burden of dealing with that disease state. Affording treatment is one thing, but traveling a great distance to get treatment is quite another. On top of this, one of the aspects that is seldom talked about is the fact that this is a chronic condition. If you have genetic atypical aHUS, it's something that you're going to live with all your life. The other part of that is that many of the different organs that are affected impact the patient in ways where it's an invisible illness. And trying to explain your fatigue to an employer or to a school nurse or teacher in your child's school makes it very difficult. So by sharing patient experiences and making sure that you hear that authentic patient voice in the exam room, or whether it's at a conference like this, it's important to include patient as partners. Today it was a wonderful example of patients being integrated in the program rather than being included as a patient panel as the end. One of the things that was surprising to us as we were planning this conference with the physicians was the fact that we could find speaker ribbons. We could not find, without specially order them, patient advocacy ribbons. So we hear a lot about patients included, but it's important to recognize that we're not quite there yet. There are a lot of barriers to rare disease research. First of all, you start with a small patient population to begin with, but then if you have exclusion criteria in your clinical trial, that further reduces, for every exclusion that you have, that further reduces the number of patients in your study. For clinical trial recruitment, again, check out your patient organizations because they can help point you to physicians that are interested in study. They can point you to partnerships with organizations in their country. They can sometimes help with funding because, to be quite honest, rare disease research, we're very fortunate to have interested parties going through and working as research teams, collaborating across various nations. You heard examples today where there were teams of researchers in Italy, the UK, and in America combining together to advance knowledge of atypical aHUS. But between the language barriers, there are patients who would really love to have access to patient materials in their own language, and those are seldom available. We actually do look at ASN, ASH, the oncology community, the immunology people. We go through all the different things that we find online, and we're so thrilled when we see open access articles where we can freely read and understand the different conditions. We do try our best to compile information. If you look at the outside of this, there are various approaches to development of new therapeutic drugs. On the inner circle of that, you'll see that there are many different disease states that have some similar clinical presentations to ours and have some things in common. Most often you hear PNH mentioned, but sometimes TP. But we wrote a blog and have a blog on our website, aHUSallianceaction.org, that notes there are about 36 different diseases. So when we see research, yes, we are interested in RA, we are interested in HSCT, we are interested in things as varied as macular degeneration. You may not think that they'd be related, but anything that is complement mediated, we would be looking at. But again, the research is so hard to find. Where do we look? Do we look under TMA? Do we look under complement-mediated diseases? It's very difficult to find our way through that. But we are, in fact, extremely interested in research, and we want to participate. We just don't know how to recognize the openings for them. In 2016, the Atypical aHUS world combined together as an alliance to do a global poll. There were 233 respondents across 23 nations. The poll was put out in multiple languages. One of the questions was, have you participated in atypical aHUS research? The question that I'd like you to ponder is 36%. No, but I'd really like to know how to participate. And that's a key driving concern for industry. You hear about patient recruitment and the difficulty in getting patients involved with clinical trials or different studies or surveys. But in fact, if we don't know how to access that, that's important. The people that did, again, yes, I've participated, 30%, and more people would like to. So if you look at that, no, but I'd like to know how, yes, and I would again, that's half our population. Use that. We want you to advance research as rapidly as possible and on as many points as possible. So where do we find this information? Another poll question was, how do you find your information? Where do you go for that? Interestingly, only 16% relied on their doctor to find out information about their disease state. Not surprisingly, because you don't walk into a patient's doctor's office as a patient and find a brochure on atypical aHUS or on TMA activity. They find it instead, in case of ours, on an atypical aHUS patient organization site. And that's why having patients as partners and patient organizations in partnership and working together in collaboration with research and industry, we can move things forward. Because there are, in fact, so many different fields. You heard it today. However, we didn't hear anything on dermatology. And in fact, TMA activity can manifest in the skin. Same thing for gastroenterology, whether it's the pancreas, whether it's the liver. We had wonderful, wonderful speakers today. But it would be nice to hear someone with a specialty to talk about pulmonary involvement as well, or a cardiologist speaking to these issues, because that is a very important thing to look at. It's a cross-specialty, a multidiscipline approach that's needed to treat TMAs, one of which is atypical aHUS. So where are patients involved, and where can they be involved? How do we grow patient involvement? How do we make it effective? And who defines what patient engagement is? Whether it's orphan drug research and development, whether it's patient registries. Again, if the information is not accessible, if information is siloed, so it's segregated and separated and not shared, we don't advance as quickly as we would like. We do need to acknowledge the policies and regulatory environment. Those are important. But there are patient advocates who are engaged in policy within their own governments and in changing the regulatory environment and healthcare policies within their nation. So in closing, our sincere thanks to the doctors who gave up their day and volunteered to do presentations. We thank you so much. And we appreciate the atypical aHUS advocates who have traveled from far off, whether we're talking about far off in the UK, or far off in Canada, or we're talking far off in Texas and traveling with a small child. We'd especially like to thank Alexion, Alnylam, Chemocentrics, and Omeris for generously supporting this conference with educational grants. And so I thank you very much for coming today, and I hope you go out inspired. I hope you go out with hope for the future, and I hope you go out with the idea that patients can be included and provide you meaningful insight and hopefully some information to help you move your own projects and interests forward so that we can provide better patient outcomes. Thank you.
This is the conclusion of the program. I'll remind you just one more time, please tweet and retweet hashtag TMA Boston. We'd like to know about what you thought of the program. Hopefully this is not the last time we have an experience like this. So please give us feedback in any way you would like, either face-to-face or via the internet. Probably the aHUSalliance.org website is the easiest way to give pointed information. But again, thank you for really staying with us for the whole day, and hopefully it was a good experience and you learned a lot.